The time before the Clone Wars is usually portrayed as a period of peace within the Republic, but while there didn't tend to be huge galaxy-spanning conflicts, there were smaller-scale wars, many of which were microcosms of the larger war to come, highlighting some of the individuals and fracture points which would shape the Clone Wars as we know them. In today's video, we'll be breaking down two of the most important conflicts of this period, focusing on emerging leaders and the militaries for both sides. In a second video later, we'll be talking more about the wars related to other cloning programs. The first conflict for the day, and probably most famous, is the Stark Hyperspace War of 44 BBY, 22 years before the Battle of Geonosis. This conflict began with a secret alliance between three business interests: the Zukfra Corporation of Typhera, who controlled Bacta production under director Adol Bell, the Trade Federation under Viceroy Hask, and the Stark Commercial Combine, a pirate outfit active in the Outer Rim and led by a smuggler named Yako Stark. The Stark Commercial Combine had built a large fleet by raiding and reselling materials from other shipping conglomerates like the Trade Federation, undercutting their prices and making Stark something of a folk hero to the poorer regions of the Outer Rim. This secret alliance planned to drive up the cost of Bacta as a way to bring down the Republic by staging an explosion at one of Zukfra's plants. Zukfra was then able to claim that there was a Bacta shortage, massively driving up prices. The Stark Combine then began raiding Trade Federation ships for Bacta that they were carrying, selling it for a very significant profit. All of this was leading up to Stark's plan for overthrowing the Republic, thinking that he could take over the galaxy, which seems a bit of a lofty goal for him. Newt Gunray, who was already the Trade Federation's representative in the Senate, was not party to the secret collusion involving the Trade Federation, and he called upon the Senate to allow the expansion of the Trade Federation defense fleet. But they weren't the only ones looking to turn this crisis into an excuse to grow the military-industrial complex which would come to dominate the galaxy during the Clone Wars. Another faction in the Senate, the Militarists, led by Ariadu Senator Ranulph Tarkin, used the crisis to push for the creation of a true Republic military for the first time in 1,000 years. In his conception, this would be a human-dominated military as well, which would be important for the type of Republic he wanted to create going forward. Hoping to avoid this remilitarization, Senator Finis Valorum was able to sway all parties into agreeing to a diplomatic summit with Stark, with Gunray and Valorum representing the Republic. Valorum also requested the assistance of the Jedi to ensure no conflict broke out during the meeting. Gunray, though, acting on his own agenda, entered into yet another secret agreement with Tarkin. Tarkin was secretly creating a fleet centered on Ariadu's planetary defense force, and requested that Gunray transmit the location of the meeting to him and his forces. He believed if he could jump in and destroy the Stark Combine, it would gain him a lot of political influence, and would make it far more likely that the Senate would agree to creating his military. And the his part of that is particularly important. It had to be his military. Valorum and Gunray headed to the secret meeting location on the planet Troikan with a Jedi team which included Qui-Gon Jinn, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Plo Koon, Adi Gallia, and Jedi High Council member Tyvoka. Meanwhile, Master Thulm and his apprentice Quinlan Vos went to Typhera to learn what they could about any misdeeds by Zukfra and the Trade Federation. They were then able to board a Trade Federation freighter being taken by the Stark Combine, which brought them to Troikan to join the rest of the Jedi Force. On Troikan, as soon as the negotiations began, Gunray lived up to his half of the deal with Tarkin and broadcasted the location to Tarkin's fleet. This was exactly what Stark was hoping would happen. He knew about Tarkin's impending attack and deployed his secret weapon. This was a nav computer virus which infected all of the incoming ships. Most of Tarkin's forces ended up jumping into planets or black holes, annihilating much of the fleet, or at least sending them vastly off course, while his flagship, the Invincible, and its few remaining escorts came under fire immediately upon reaching Troikan. Despite Valorum's protest that Tarkin's actions were unsanctioned by the Republic, Stark and his own guards, who had been hoping for this outcome, began firing on the Republic's negotiating team in the meeting. Master Tyvoka was accidentally mortally wounded by Gunray's own droids in the ensuing fray, and Stark managed to escape. The Jedi retreated to Mount Avos, informing Tarkin of their position, and he began to order his remaining forces, now down to a quarter of their original strength, to rendezvous there as well. His own flagship, the Invincible, was destroyed in the process, but he and much of his crew managed to arrive at Avos in the escape pods. But before we find out what happens next, let's talk about today's sponsor. No, really, there actually is one this time. Today's video is sponsored by Manta Sleep. I have always been terrible at sleeping, but with their infinitely adjustable sleep mask, Manta Sleep is leading the way in their pro-nap movement to a good night's sleep or a good mid-afternoon nap. There are several mask options and accessories, but I personally have the Manta Sound Sleep Mask, which has integrated and adjustable Bluetooth speakers, allowing me to very comfortably listen to music, podcasts, shows, or even a Star Wars audiobook as I fall asleep. To me, that feature is crucial in making sure my brain doesn't start meticulously planning every conversation I might find myself in the next day. On top of being made out of premium materials, the eye cups in the mask can be adjusted to any location to fit any face, including my very pointy one. They're incredibly effective at blacking out any light. I can't see anything right now, which means if I want to fall asleep listening to a book and Dana wants to read, we can each do that and nobody's disturbed. Kazoo seemed to like it as well. You can go to the link in the description below and use checkout code DATAPAD for 10% off your order. Thanks again to Manta Sleep for sponsoring today's video. Now at Mount Avos, Tarkin and Gunray wanted to surrender, but Plo Koon was able to glean information from the minds of Stark and his deputies, learning the Combine was on the brink of collapse. Stark was able to maintain control of his nearly mutinous crew for the moment thanks to the virus having infected almost all of the Republic's hyperdrives beyond just Tarkin's fleet. Stark believed and was able to convince the rest of his crew that they were on the brink of victory because of this. Tarkin's forces and the Jedi remained under siege and constant bombardment by Stark, unable to even communicate with Coruscant until Plo Koon realized he could telepathically speak to his niece, another Jedi named Sha Koon. They were all then able to devise a new plan. Newt Gunray and Adi Gallia were sent to Coruscant on a stolen Stark craft to warn Chancellor Kolpana and the Senate not to surrender and to acquire additional help, while Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan worked on a plan to patch the virus. This patch came from an unexpected source, liking this video and subscribing for more, but actually it was Stark himself. He had been telepathically offered amnesty by Plo Koon if he defected, given how close he was to being overthrown by his own underlings. He was then extracted by his flagship the Raptor by Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan. On Coruscant, Mace, Windu, and Adi Gallia were able to convince the Trade Federation that they needed to destroy the Combine, securing the use of a large fleet of Trade Federation freighters with patched hyperdrives to return to Troikan. This was done in exchange for the Jedi not revealing the Trade Federation's complicity in the crisis. This new relief fleet was led through Master Oppo Rensesis' battle meditation, while Master Saesee Tin led the starfighter forces. Adi Gallia was also returning with the fleet, and they were joined by Masters Eth Koth and Mace Windu. Despite still being outnumbered, the new fleet was able to destroy the Combine fleet, while on the ground the rest of the Combine forces were trapped in Mount Avos by the Republic, who had retreated out the back of the mountain. Ranulph Tarkin, furious that his glory was being stolen from him, detonated an opening to a cave full of local predators named Chalet Eaters, which he hoped would destroy not just the Combine forces but also the Jedi, particularly Plo Koon, who he felt had usurped his command and thrown off his political project for the human chauvinist military. The Jedi and Judicial Force members were able to escape, but Tarkin himself and the Combine forces were destroyed, thus ending the conflict. Stark, given immunity for his defection despite manufacturing the whole crisis, which seems kind of terrible, turned into a legitimate businessman working for the Commerce Guild, a position he likely still had when the Commerce Guild fought the Clone Wars on the side of the CIS 20 years later. The second conflict we'll be looking at today are the Andoan Wars, and it shows two things. One is that these wars act as a kind of case study for local tensions which ignited and informed the allegiances of different groups in the Clone Wars. While on the surface, the Clone Wars were about the CIS and the Republic, on a more local level, there were longer-standing rivalries and power dynamics at play. Second, this conflict involves the origins of one of the most notorious leaders of the CIS Navy, Admiral Trench. This conflict, which went from 57 to 39 BBY, takes us to the eastern reaches of the Lambda sector. This area was dominated by the Aqualish species from the Ando system, which had three primary subspecies, the Ualak, the Aquala, and the Quara. The region was also home to the closely related Harch species from Secundus Ando, another system. Collectively, Ando, Secundus Ando, and the other local systems colonized by the Aqualish and the Harch were subject to a government referred to as the Spiverelda, on account of how the Harch look like spiders. Historically, the Harch were the despotic rulers of the region, but by the time of the Andoan Wars they had been overthrown by the Aqualish, and instead had become loyal partners of the now Aqualish-dominated Spiverelda. The Andoan Wars began in 57 BBY, when 15 Aqualish colony worlds broke free of the Spivarelda's harsh government. The resulting wars were described as incredibly bloody, and Trench first rose to prominence defending Secundus Ando from raids by the Andoan free colonies. He quickly became seen as the greatest military leader on the Spivarelda's side of the conflict, and he led the final push against the free colonies, achieving victories at Arbular, Horos, and finally Rakish in 39 BBY to bring the free colonies to heel. Continued inaction by the Republic over the last 15 years or so had convinced the Spivarelda that they had nothing to fear from external influences, allowing Trench to continually ramp up the ferocity of his tactics. But the sheer firepower and horror on display at Rakish was enough to finally convince the Republic that something had to be done. While the Republic still had no full formal military at this point, 5 years after Randolph Tarkin's failure at Troikan and Quotile in the Stark Hyperspace War, the Republic Judicials were more powerful than Trench's forces, big as they may have seemed for such a minor local power. The Judicials separated the free colonies from the Spivarelda, and the Spivarelda was forced to demilitarize. This saved the free colonies from Spivarelda rule, but it radicalized the Spivarelda and particularly Trench against the Republic. Much like Stark after the Stark Hyperspace conflict and General Grievous after his own world suffered from Republic interference in the Huck War, which I've covered in another video, Trench made his way into the military branch of one of the mega corporations, which would soon openly oppose the Republic as founding members of the CIS. Stark and Grievous had joined the Commerce Guild and Banking Clan respectively, but Trench found his new home in the Corporate Alliance. He led the Alliance's forces in multiple successful engagements, including the destruction of pirate bases at Angira and Ordna Mert. He also led the successful seizure of the Kuros Systems merchant fleet at Prospera Jang. But his next major confrontation with the Republic would come with the Battle of Malastare Narrows in 34 BBY. The Corporate Alliance instigated a conflict with Malastare by hiring Securian pirates to steal fuel tankers from Malastare, and then Trench was dispatched with a fleet of Corporate Alliance fantail destroyers to blockade the world, much like the Trade Federation would do to Naboo only a year later. The Dugs of Malastare lacked the power to stand up to Trench and the Alliance on their own, so they appealed to now Chancellor Valorum to end the blockade. Valorum did not want to commit the Judicials, but he also strongly doubted the Dustig Sector force, which is where Malastare was, could win if fighting erupted, so he pushed for the neighboring sectors to support Malastare directly, while he also secretly started supplying the Dugs with credits to hire privateers. He then sent a Republic force which included a Jedi named Kep Shi, and led by a young officer named Wolf Yularen, who had already fought Securian pirates in his time with the Quaimar sector forces, to serve as military observers. The battle which followed saw the destruction of Trench's flagship, and many believed he had perished, but the cost of the Republic allied forces were high enough that it severely embarrassed Valorum and built up a legendary reputation for the thought-to-be-deceased Admiral Trench. Trench revealed his survival at the beginning of the Clone Wars, where Yularen recognized the insignia of his old adversary. Ando and Ando Secundus were among the first worlds to secede from the Republic before the Clone Wars, hoping the CIS would allow them to once again assert their dominance over the Andoan free colonies, who remained staunch allies of the Republic. The demilitarization of Ando was overseen by the Ando Demilitarization Observation Group, which was led by such Jedi as Joris Sabayoth, a clone of whom would go on to collaborate with Grand Admiral Thrawn after the death of the Emperor. We don't have a ton of details about the fighting in this region during the Clone Wars, but we can imagine that the Andoan Wars essentially reignited as one of the many local fronts of the Galactic Clone Wars, except now with potentially some droids or clones thrown in. It's worth remembering, though, that many fronts of the Clone Wars saw few or no clone or droid forces at all, and even the maps of major troop movements and held territory tend to hide the fact that there wasn't just one solid front line. Many of these places were fighting the entire time. That's going to do it for today, though. Once again, a big thank you to Manta Sleep for sponsoring this video. Check out the link in the description and use checkout code DATAPAD to get 10% off your order and to help support the channel. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you next time.